Can we start? Louder. Can we start? Okay. We all ready? On behalf of Pat McLoughlin, it is my pleasant duty to extend a welcome to you all to this lovely evening on such a wonderful, weather-wise, such a wonderful day. And it's a great occasion to be gathered here to launch and celebrate Pat's first collection of short stories. Now, Tipperary is known for many things. Apart from its hurlers, it is known for its music and song, and its writers, from Charles Kickham to Knocknagoshel to Donal Ryan, and now Pat McLoughlin. Pat was born and reared in Newport. Now, even though I've known Pat for a very long time, and I knew that he wrote poetry, I certainly didn't realise that he was writing all these other stories as well. And I was most impressed when he confided in me that he was putting together a book of short stories. And in the book, which we now have here, Paddy Fulham says in the preface that writing short stories is very demanding and challenging. And author Stephen King said that the road to hell is paved with adverbs, whilst Philip Roth said that the road to hell is paved with works in progress. However, Pat has travelled the road, gone the distance, and produced a lovely collection entitled To Weave with Words. No stranger to being published, of course. His poems and short stories have appeared in 2 anthologies, no less, and local and national papers. This is his first collection of short stories. Very charming, very evocative, and I know there will be many more to come. Now, we have lots of people here this evening to talk and to acknowledge Pat and his achievements. And Pat acknowledges in the foreword to his book that without Dominic Taylor and the people at the Limerick Writers' Centre, that his book would never have seen, as he said, the light of day. Now, here to tell us how he weaves his magic with the writers, Dominic Taylor from the Limerick Writers' Centre.
Thanks, Sheila. And as Sheila said, my name is Dominic Taylor, and as publishers of Pat's book, To Weave with Words, I'd just like to set out the role of the Limerick Writers' Centre. Tonight, we celebrate the launch of a new book. The writer, as you all know, is Pat McLoughlin, and the publisher is the Limerick Writers' Centre. And I believe that there is something important going on here tonight, and some would even say radical. Something important and radical on a number of levels, and I think perhaps that we should give some thought to what exactly is happening here. This is a publishing and creative event. Today, we live in a world dominated by large commercial publishers. And in recent years, large media businesses, people who privately own radio, television, cable, magazines, newspapers, and websites, have bought up more and more of the many traditional publishing houses. And we have now reached the stage where a small number of large conglomerates are in control of publishing. And this basically means that they're in control of what a sizable number of the population reads. I believe that we should be aware of small, independent community publishers like the Limerick Writers' Centre and the work they do. We should also question how well they are supported by our Arts Council and local authority arts offices. Do we want to reach a stage, as in the United States, where the top 20 publishers control 90% of book sales? And these publishers are not run by literary editors, but by marketing people. And basically, for them to publish an unknown author, the book will have to conform to what they believe the market wants. The whole concept of reaching out to a broader public and getting ideas across to people who might not normally have bought a book is disappearing. It is obvious that this situation will fundamentally change what kind of books are available to us. Small publishing houses are run by people who have a passion or belief, certainly not because of the profits they generate. They publish important books that otherwise may not be published at all. The book we are launching tonight is the 76th title the Limerick Writers' Centre has published since 2008 under its Community Publishing Initiative. Community publication here broadly refers to a publication produced within a community by and for that community, in contrast to a book that has gone through a commercial process. At the Limerick Writers' Centre, we share a belief that writing and publishing should be made both available and accessible to all. We try as much as possible to represent diverse voices and advocate for increased writing and publishing access to individuals and groups who have not typically had this access. We promote writing done by ordinary people, people who maybe are not trained writers and may struggle to get their ideas down on paper. We value difference and welcome people who may lack confidence in themselves and their writing ability. We bring together groups who value literature not just for its literary value, but who see its transformative power both for the individual and society. And we believe that stories, poems, diaries, memoirs do, as Seamus Heaney suggests, function as bearers of value. We are also, importantly, dedicated to printing short-run, high-quality produced titles that are accessible to all. We actively encourage writers, from the serious career-minded to people who write for pleasure, healing, personal growth, insight, or just to inform. And over the years, we have produced a broad range of writing, including poetry, history, memoir, and general prose. Books are still a powerful form of dialogue between individuals and communities. The technology of the book is old, but it is still cutting edge. And at the end of the day, as Samuel Beckett rightly stated, words are all we have. We each have something to say that describes ways of living in the world, and as such, it is what gives meaning and resonance to our lives. That is why this is an important occasion here tonight. I especially want to pay tribute to Pat McLoughlin, who has made the long journey from the imagination to the page, a journey that all writers have to make. And as Edna O'Brien once put it, it is purgatoria and inferno to write a book and keep writing. But Pat has made that journey and brought us his precious, fragile cargo here tonight. And I'm delighted that the Limerick Writers' Centre is in a position to present that cargo to the public. Throughout the book, Pat has weaved, as the title suggests, and stitched together a tapestry of words that in many ways offers readers a privileged picture of common joys and suffering, tinged with understanding rather than being judgmental. And this is the work that the Limerick Writers' Centre strives to nurture and develop. There is something uniquely transformative when a collection of people across cultures, beliefs, ages, abilities, life practices, genders, and language, when so many people gather together to share writing and literature and the imagination with one another. Let's celebrate that this evening with the launch of To Weave with Words by Pat McLoughlin. Thank you very much.
Pat had a tutor when he was attending the Writers' Centre, poet Ron Carey, and unfortunately Ron couldn't be here this evening, but he's written a letter and I want to read it to you now. Dear Pat, I'm so sorry I can't be at the launch of your book tonight. You know I would love to be there to see you get the acclaim that your work truly deserves. And so it's finally here, a wonderful collection of writing that reflects your own humanity and resilience of spirit. I know how you entertained all the participants on your creative writing course with your terrific stories, and yet how I struggled to convince you of your talent. Well, here you are, a published writer with your first collection of short stories, enjoying the moment with all your family and friends. I'm sure you will be a little nervous, but just remember this is your moment. One of your dreams is coming true. Enjoy the experience to the full, and don't forget to tell everyone it's never too late. Congratulations, with warm regards and best wishes for the future, Ron. And now our next guest, a native son of Arda. Paddy has spent his lifetime in education, and in the preface to Pat's book, he writes that the stories portray the rich and varied tapestry of human life. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Paddy Fulham.
First of all, many thanks to Pat for having invited me tonight and to have been part of this celebration and part of the launch. Pat and I go back a long way. When my late wife Pauline and I came to live in Newcastle West in the mid-70s, the game of squash was enjoying a huge popularity. And for some reason, Pat and I became very keen and very intense rivals.
I could never beat you.
But of course, when Paddy Fulham and Pat McLoughlin took to the squash court, this was Limerick playing Tipperary.
Oh, yeah.
And believe me, that added a new spice to the whole proceedings. I can tell you there were no prisoners taken on that squash court. But we were fitter and we were younger then. Time has marched on. However, out of an intense rivalry, something develops. First thing that happens is you get a very deep respect for your opponent. And out of that deep respect grows a friendship. And for Pat and I, it's been a lasting friendship down through the years. But I didn't realise he was involved in writing stories. He kept that a secret from me. And then recently he came and he said, Paddy, I'm working with the Limerick Writers' Centre, and I'd ask you to do a favour for me. I said, anything, Pat, you ask, I'll do it. I didn't realise what was involved. He said, I'm actually writing some stories and I'd like you to proofread them for me. I said, all right, I'll do that. So, got out my red biro. You see, once a teacher, you can't escape. The chalk dust is in your lungs, it's everywhere. And I began my work. But as I was proofreading, I began to enjoy the stories. I said, these are really good. And then, of course, I had to stop. Because if you're enjoying the story, you're going to miss the misspellings and the punctuation marks and the syntax and the grammar and all the rest of it. So, Paddy, start again. Start reading line by line, do your work, do it carefully, then you can go back and enjoy the stories. And that's what Paddy Fulham did. I did it to the best of my ability, and then I went back and I read. And the first thing I thought to myself was, this is a talented storyteller. This man has it. He's got the gift. This is absorbing stuff. This must be made accessible. This must be made available to the public. They're going to enjoy it. I also thought to myself what an honour he had placed in me in giving me this work to do. Because when you hand over something that you have created, whether it's a story, whether it's a poem, whether it's a painting, whether it's a piece of sculpture, you're giving over something that's precious and so meaningful to you, and you're asking somebody else to sit in a type of a judgment on it. And as Yeats so succinctly put it, he said, I have placed my dreams under your feet, tread warily, because you tread on my dreams. That's what happens when you get somebody else's work. They've given over something precious to you. Now, I wouldn't dream of treading on Pat's dreams. But I said I would have to go and give him back his scripts with the red biro marks and tell him what I thought. And I said, Pat, these are gems. This really, you've got to get this published. You've got to give this to the wider audience. You've got to show people what you're capable of doing. And then he did me the further honour. He asked me if I would write a preface for him. And if you'll bear with me, I will just read 2 paragraphs. There is an honesty and authenticity in his work that is both refreshing and extremely appealing. In this eclectic compilation of short stories, Pat draws on his own life experiences, on anecdotal narratives, and on events both past and contemporary. Some of the stories are based on actual historical events, ranging from the national to the international. Other stories are the fruits of childhood memories that made a significant impact on Pat's philosophical worldview. His stories encompass the factual and fictitious, but all are conveyed with a conversational style of writing that immediately engages and continues to hold the attention of the reader. There is a superb mixture of humour and tragedy, of harmony and strife, of love and conflict, and of loneliness and companionship. I really thought that the characters in the story were absorbing and portrayed all the qualities that we know exist in human life. Each story takes the reader on a memorable and enthralling journey. On the way, you will meet a diverse range of characters that portray the rich and varied tapestry of human life. All the stories have cleverly constructed plots that will absorb and engross the reader's mind. The destination of each story will hold the reader in suspense right up to the final lines. Rather like the mystery tour, there is often an unexpected twist in the tale that will cause the reader to pause and reflect. That is how I summed up Pat's stories, and I am so honoured to be here tonight, as I said, to honour Pat, to congratulate him. And I said to him, Pat, your next problem will be people will want more and more of the same. Pat, gonaidi go galak, berbu agus banach, go a mila mahadrif.
Now, of course, when somebody produces a book, they have to have a launch, and why not? This is how we let everybody know what people are doing. And the main reason, I suppose, why we're all here tonight is for this launch. And Patrick O'Donovan is another native son. He entered politics at a young age and has served as a TD since 2011. Seen as a rising star in the political firmament, may I introduce Patrick O'Donovan, TD, Minister of State at the Department of Finance and the Department of Expenditure and Reform.
Thanks very much, Sheila, and first of all, thanks very much, Pat, for giving me the great honour of launching your book. And I got it during the week there, and the first thing I'd say about it is it's really a lovely read. I think Paddy Fulham, the academic who was the man responsible for making a primary teacher out of me, God help us. There's a lot of things he can claim credit for. But I think Paddy's acknowledgement probably does more for this book than I could ever do. But I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, about Pat and whether or not he's a Tipperary exile in Limerick. And I know he'd find the recent tweet that's going around in the immediate aftermath of Tipperary's crash out of the Munster Championship, where Simple Stadium was available for anyone who wanted to bail silage on it. But no sooner were Tipperary gone, of course, but Pat's adopted home place in Limerick. And I think, you know, one thing that this town is synonymous for is it has provided a home for people down through the years, whether they were from Tipperary or Arda, and more recently from places like Eastern Europe and further afield. This town has always been a very welcoming town. It has been a very welcoming town for people that have come into it over many generations. And people that have often, the people that have made the biggest contribution in the town are sometimes the outsiders. And Pat McLoughlin has certainly made a big contribution to this town in many ways. Whether it has been in everything that moved by way of a ball on the golf course, or in the many community events that he's been organised in over a huge number of years. And people might say that he's actually busier now than he was when he was with DSB. And it was actually, I didn't mean that in a funny way. That suggestion, you're suggesting now he didn't work hard at DSB. But it was actually through DSB that my family got to know Pat McLoughlin, because my late father used to paint the office where over under Russell McMahon's office, as you all know now, where Julie's Pharmacy is. It used to be the old DSB shop. And Pat McLoughlin was one of the key men in DSB in the time, and it was out of that he built up a friendship with my father. And then, of course, Mary Whalen, as we know her, Mary Sullivan, our cousin, was next door. And one thing that we knew about the McLoughlins from Mary and from her late husband John, and from my granduncle John Whelan, was that the McLoughlins were great neighbours. Pat and Eleanor were great neighbours to the people on the Monaghan Road, and latterly to the people in Meadowcourt. And they reared their family there, and they made a big contribution to the town, and Pat still makes a very big contribution to the town, as did Eleanor for many years, working as she did in West Limerick Resources. And of course, probably poor old Pat used to be going around collecting application forms for halls and community centres and skateboard parks, and will you put in a word with Eleanor there for us? And he probably did. But they have made a big contribution here, and I think just on behalf of the community of Newcastle West, first and foremost, I'd like to thank Pat and Eleanor for the contribution that you have made to your adopted home place over many years. And I think your son and daughter, Orla and Shane, are very rightly proud of ye as parents, but I think the people of Newcastle West are very proud as well of the different things that you've done along the way to make this town a much better place to live in. But in the book anyway, the one thing that I get from the book is that first and foremost is Pat's mother is the first thing that jumps out at you, because the very opening pages is a dedication to his mother. And that's, like many of us, the mammy is always the key instrument in terms of the formation of the child, number one, and latterly the adult. And there's a lovely tribute in the front of the book to Pat's mum. And then throughout as well, you get a kind of a twist and turn of a number of stories. And I was reading it during the week in Dublin, and whether it is in the excitement of Christmas morning for the child getting the machine gun. God, you had a great childhood. Or the ghost in the castle that was actually the neighbour's dog that had a chain tied around its neck. But then you see the humanity as well in rural areas coming through very much so, and it's actually a completely rural book as well, because you're taken on a journey at one stage from Dublin down along country lanes with the grass growing up through it, and the Jack Frost, as he says, touching the grass, to a situation where I presume it was a pheasant was shot, and you see how the pheasant finally finishes up and the end of its life, and the imagery that's in the book as well is very evocative, and it's very, very well written, and it's a lovely read. And there's one particular story, and I won't delay you, but I wanted to read a part of it because I think it'll be appropriate, because it was called Up for the Match. For anybody that ever went to a rugby match without a ticket or without a place to stay, or had boat and lost boat, as some of us did, Norrie Mulcahy will know what I'm talking about. For those of us that were going in the good old days when Munster were at their peak, over and back to Wales, and being left stranded in buses under bridges. And as Michael Finucane, he's here, was involved in a bus one time where they had to leave the wind out of the tyres to get the bus under the bridge. It was almost as if he appeared in this book as well as an alias. But there's two fellas in this anyway. There's two fellas in this book, in this story, called Alan and Tim, and neither of them had. And they're here, they? And there was I thinking you were fictional. Well, I tell you now, I hope your other halves have read this, because what you were up to. But Alan and Tim anyway arrived, no ticket, no transport, no nothing, and they arrived to the match, and eventually codded themselves, Tipperary people of course, into getting into the match. It doesn't actually say they're from Tipperary at all. They're probably from Newcastle. But this is just towards the end of it anyway, and they've eventually gotten into the stadium, and they've been rumbled a couple of times for not having tickets, and they've been moved along, and we've all seen it at people at matches, where they sit down in the seat knowing that it's not their seat, and they're moved on. But eventually anyway, this is the end of the story. So Tim suddenly bounded down the steps. He had spotted an empty seat. As he dropped into the seat, he was politely told by the men next to him that the seat was taken. To his disappointment and to the annoyance of the people who had been disturbed in his entry, he beat a hasty retreat, apologising continuously en route. Strange as it may seem, Alan had been offered a seat by an Ulster supporter whose father had failed to make the game due to illness. The Leinster supporters were in great voice as their team took command of the game, and by half-time looked unbeatable. During the interval, as people went for refreshments, Tim, who had spent the first half on his haunches at the back aisle of the stand, noticed the seat he had earlier tried to secure was still vacant. Most people, including Alan, would have been happy to let sleeping dogs lie, but not Tim. He made his way to the vacant seat and said to the keeper of the seat, "Is that seat definitely taken?" "Yes, I already told you so. It's reserved for my wife." "But it's half time and she still hasn't turned up," said Tim, bold as brass. "Well, she's dead, you see, and I'm keeping the seat as a mark of respect." "Oh, I'm very sorry to hear that," said Tim, genuinely taken aback. "Thank you," said the other man. After a short pause, Tim said, "I don't mean not to be disrespectful, but I would imagine that your deceased wife wouldn't mind if you brought one of your friends to the game instead." "That's impossible," said the man. "Why is that?" said Tim. Without taking his eyes off the field, the man replied, "They're all at the funeral." So look, there's a good crowd here this evening, and everybody here knows Pat and the McLoughlins for different reasons, and has, I'm sure, their own book of short stories on Pat and the family. But look, just on my own behalf and on behalf of everybody else here, and on behalf of the wider community, I want to wish Pat the very, very best of luck with this. I remember one time being above at the library, and Vicky Nash was launching an art exhibition of some description. I can't remember now who it was, but I remember one of the things that she said was that, you know, anybody that puts their work down on a canvas is essentially bearing themselves down for people to criticise it, and for people not to like it, and for people to like it, and for people to buy it. It's the same when you put something like this down in writing, and of course, you know, it's not an easy thing to do, and it's a very brave thing to do, and it's a very courageous thing to do, and I think it's something that should be celebrated. And it's that, you know, that kind of almost that saying that John B. Keane said in relation to the great writers in North Kerry, you know, that if they fell out of bed in North Kerry, they'd wake up in West Limerick. So while there might be Tipperary blood running through him, there certainly is that West Limerick sense of humour now very much in him. And with that, I just want to wish Pat very well with this. It's a lovely book, it's a lovely read, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And thanks very much for giving me the great opportunity to officially launch Pat's book, To Weave With Words.
Now, I think you'll agree that Patrick has well and truly whetted the appetite. The stories are really, as Patrick said, very, very evocative. I have 7 brothers, and I grew up on a farm, and I could absolutely identify with so much. The cap guns, and I can still smell the sulphur when the cap guns were shot around the kitchen. And some of my brothers shoot, so I could absolutely see them out in the, you know, with the pheasants and the dogs and whatever, that kind of thing. There are so many elements in this book that you can all identify with. It's very, very charming, as I said already, very evocative. And of course, now the moment we've all been waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, the author of To Weave With Words, Pat McLoughlin.
Folly that, let's just say. There was a little bit of confusion about the book. Mary O'Sullivan was under the impression that the book was about her former neighbours, our former neighbours in Morning Road. Dennis Noonan thought the book was about Tipperary hurling. I can assure you that would be a very short story this one. I won't keep you long now, but I suppose over recent weeks and days, people have been asking me where I get my ideas from. I know some writers place a blank sheet of paper in front of them and sit and wait for the inspiration. In my case, these thoughts arrive uninvited into my head, and I have to kind of download them for a bit of peace of mind, otherwise they drive me to distraction. I've no idea where they come from. But I know the therapy. Write it down, and it's gone. Bob Dylan, in his song Maggie's Farm, there's a line in that which says, "I wake up in the morning, fold my hands and pray for rain." Might be a bad idea. I've got a head full of ideas that's driving me insane, and I can identify with that. I suppose we all carry thoughts and stuff around in our heads. Our minds are constantly thinking, and it can be difficult to stop it. Eckhart Tolle who wrote The Power of Now, described it as a disease. If you try it sometime, if you sit quietly and just see how long you can go without having whatever thought entering your head. I think if you get to 5 seconds, you'll probably be doing okay. But in any case, you know, we all create drama in our heads, you know, and most people don't write it down. You know, for instance, if you go to the doctor, and for instance, he refers you to a consultant, you know, the drama starts, and by the time you get to the waiting room, you're making your funeral arrangements. We think that's a modern phenomenon, but the 16th century writer Michel de Montaigne said, "There were many terrible things in my life, and most of them never happened." You know, if we make a mistake at work, or if a student does badly in one subject, I mean, maybe we did 10 things perfect during the day, and we did another 6 subjects perfect. What's the one that's going to bother us the most? Do you know what I mean? I don't need to tell you, you know. And again, our friend de Montaigne has a quote for that. He says, "Nothing fixes a thing so intensely in the memory as the wish to forget it." I suppose I've always enjoyed telling stories, and you know, I can go back pre-television. I can actually go back pre-electricity. I was about 4. The younger members of the family, this is a totally different life. They know nothing about that. But I can go back. I remember the ESP being switched on when I was about 3 or 4. I can't remember much before that, but the excitement of all of a sudden these lights, and my mother worried about the cobwebs, all of a sudden they were starting to show. But as I say, I can go back to that time, and neighbours came in. There was no kind of ringing up to say, "Can we come in?" They opened the door, they walked in, and they sat down, they told stories. And my parents told them stories. And that kind of conversational style, you know, that's the way I like to write. I love dialogue, and I try to do that. I hope I achieve that in my writing. And as I said, I love the stories, and my colleagues in the ESB and on the golf course, you know, we always tell stories and yarns and what have you, and it adds greatly to the enjoyment of work and golf and all the rest of it. But I didn't, I suppose, despite what the minister says, I didn't have time to write when I was working. So anyway, I wrote my first story the week after I retired, believe it or not. And maybe some of my family now won't remember this, but I decided to book a family holiday in Lanzarote, and we went off to Lanzarote. So I got the hotel note paper. I got this thing in my head, and I got the hotel note paper, and I started writing my story. But lo and behold, before I was halfway through it, the hotel was hit by a hurricane. And windows were blown in, and windows were blown out, and patio doors were blown out, and it left a trail of disaster in its way. I suppose you could say I got off to a stormy start. But anyway, as I say, I really enjoy the writing. I wake up early in the morning and get a cup of tea, and I switch on my laptop, and I could write for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, and it seems like 2 minutes. Now, 5 hours is probably the exception, but it would always be an hour or 2. But in any case, you know, I don't see it as work, you know. And again, there's a famous quote. Now, 2 people have been kind of credited with this quote, Confucius and Mark Twain. But it says, "Find a job you enjoy doing, and you will never have to work a day in your life." That wasn't in the ESB, no, it is. The hard part is that I find is the editing, the cutting, pasting, stitching and unstitching. That is extremely tedious as far as I'm concerned. I mean all the big name writers, they just write the stuff and somebody else does all that for them. Nuala Cream said, "In Ireland we have a great tradition of storytelling. Firstly, we tell stories to try and make sense of the human condition. And secondly, when we hear a story, we connect with one another. We come to know each other." And I think that's very true. I won't hold you much longer now. I saw an ad in the paper in early 2017, and it was for a creative writing class in the Limerick Writer Centre. And I thought, great, I was all enthusiasm and applied and all the rest. Got on to Dominic, and you're very welcome, and very welcome, everything was fine. And I drove in and parked my car in Perry Square. And I thought, what am I doing? I said, Jesus, and I was going to get in and come home again, but anyway, thankfully, I went, and the welcome was absolutely fantastic, and I met some fantastic people. Some of them are here tonight, my fellow writers, and we were actually blessed. We had a magnificent tutor and published poet, Ron Carey, and he encouraged us to dig deep and go to times and places where you haven't gone before. Now that was a bit scary, but his gentle nudging and constant encouragement, I suppose, is one of the main reasons why I'm here tonight. He was hoping to be here, but unfortunately, for family reasons, he can't be here. So last Christmas, anyway, Ron, we did two courses, one in the early 2017 and one later. And Ron was pushing me in all the time and talk to Dominic. And I was still not convinced, I suppose. So at Christmas anyway, I picked up the courage and I kind of sidled up to my friend, Dr. Paddy Fulham. And I was I didn't feel I don't know what I felt, I wasn't comfortable. And I mentioned it to Paddy. And Paddy said, oh, I'd be delighted. So, Paddy, I hope I didn't spoil your Christmas.
You made it, Pat. You made it.
But Paddy, anyway, read the collection, and he came back with the red biro, and but he had some very wise and meaningful suggestions, and he was more than generous in his praise. Excuse me. That was the final push I needed. So, to make a long story short, in January I dropped the collection into Dominic, and at the Writers' Centre, and the rest, as I say, is history. Dominic and all the people at the Writers' Centre did a fantastic job and sculpted the stories into this lovely production we have here tonight. I took plenty of advice. Now, my son often quotes Oscar Wilde to me. When I give him advice, he says, Oscar Wilde says the best thing to do with advice is pass it on. I agree with that, but in my case, not before I have used every last syllable of it. And the other thing was, I suppose, the great philosopher Socrates said, I know nothing. And I think that's a fantastic way to approach anything, because your mind is totally open. And if you think you know it all, your mind is closed and you're not going to take any advice. So all the people who gave me advice, and there are lots of them here tonight, I won't mention them all, I really appreciate that, and it certainly helped me a lot. Ron Carey, in his lovely message that Sheila read earlier, he said to tell everyone it's never too late. Again, my friend Michel de Montaigne said, there is nothing more notable in Socrates than that he found time, when he was an old man, to learn music and dancing, and thought it was time well spent. George Eliot, another quote from George, he said, it's never too late to become the person you might have been. Wise words. And the final quote, disappointment is temporary, regret is permanent. So I'll just have a few thank yous, and then I might, if you want me to read a story, I will. Am I keeping you too long? No. I know it's very hot in here, but when we're finished here, there's the bar, there's an area reserved down in the bar, which is air conditioned and state of the art. So you can look forward to that. I just want to say a few thank yous to Minister Patrick O'Donovan for taking the time out of his busy schedule to launch my book. You did me a tremendous honour, Patrick, and for that I'm extremely grateful. To the Longcourt House, this is our new hotel and we're very proud of it, for their wonderful hospitality, Trina in particular. To Dominic and all at the Limerick Writers Centre for the beautiful publication. Poet Ron Carey for his encouragement and masterful tuition. to Dr. Paddy Fulham for his assistance and advice, the Limerick Leader, Weekly Observer, West Limerick 102, Limerick 95, Tony Hayes, Newcastle West, and Anne Lyons Abbeyfield for stocking the books in their shops. To my writing colleagues in Desmond Scribblers for their continued support. We started a little writing group here in town, and they're scattered around the home here tonight. So we have our own little writing. We meet once a month, and there's nothing too heavy about it. Just anyway. To everyone here tonight, your presence has made this a night to remember. Some of you will have inspired me down through the years with your stories and yarns. So it was a fantastic crowd, and sincere thanks to everybody for coming out. You know, I know you could have been in better places by the seaside, but I really appreciate it. To my friends in the Limerick School of Philosophy, some of them are here tonight also, who changed my way of life and thinking. To my wonderful family for their unwavering support. Finally, I would like to thank our wonderful MC, Sheila O'Reagan, who did and is doing a fantastic job. Sheila is a wonderful broadcaster, a historian, and a board member of IMA, the Irish Museum of Modern Art. Thank you very much, Sheila. I'll read the first story in the book. So it's called The Joy of Giving. It's a kind of a child's kind of struggle with conscience and all the rest of it, and it goes from the future to the present, to the past, to the future, to the present, all over the place. So here we go, The Joy of Giving. I know all the responses, but I don't understand the word. The priest is now well into the Latin Mass, and I'm in a world of my own. With my hand in my pocket, I can feel the corners of the brass trumping a bit that my mother had earlier given me. 3 penny bars after Mass. I can't wait. I make an effort to concentrate on the remainder of Mass, but hard as I try, I failed miserably to stay in the present. I now have a loose action plan worked out. I'll devour 2 of the bars and save the third one for my mother. Simply delicious. She has made no such request, but I can picture the surprise, excitement and delight on her face when I present it to her. This vista brings a smile to my face, and I am determined, no matter what, to make her day. Before I know it, I'm being carried in the slipstream of the congregation as they shuffle slowly towards the sunlit exit at the rear of the church. I dip my finger in the holy water font, make the sign of the cross, and give my pocket another check to make sure that my piece of treasure hasn't escaped. As the coast clears, I race to Egan's shop and gladly exchange the piece of brass for 3 silver-wrapped pieces of delight. Whack! I smack the first bar against the windowsill. I can hardly contain myself as the silver paper splits to expose the inviting light brown toffee inside. I experience a mouth-watering rush of saliva as the slab of toffee lands on my tongue, and sensations of pleasure permeate my entire body. Manna from heaven. My ecstasy is somewhat dampened when my friend Tom Mahoney sidles up to me and says, "Give me a sweet." I reluctantly hand Tom the other half, and we quietly chew our way through Pound Street. The odd word is forced out through melting toffee and churning saliva, and by the time we get to Collins Avenue, the precious substance is gone, and our gobs are empty once more. Tom looks in my direction and says, "Have you got any more?" My head keeps telling me to say, "No." My heart relents. Tom has been generous to me in the past, and minutes later we have gobbled the second bar. We part company. Tom heads up the avenue to his home, and I keep thinking about the 1 mile I still have to travel with nothing to chew on the way. I can feel the bar in my pocket, and the temptation is unbearable. I take my hand out of my pocket in an effort to remove the desire. It works for a whole minute. My thoughts race back to the bar. I fight them and tell him, "No, this is for my mother." It's proving to be a long and tortuous journey home, and by the time I reach Rockvale Cemetery, I've convinced myself. She won't miss a little piece if I break it cleanly and wrap it neatly in the silver paper. Once